See that family over there? Watch me get 'em with a pair. Blood and guts just everywhere. Napalm sticks to kids.
Napalm. Even the word conjures images of horrific burns and injuries and the Vietnam War. No other weapon is so tied to a particular conflict, whilst being ingrained into our understanding of the horrors of war. Images of heavily burned survivors of napalm and black smoke rising amongst the forest are easily brought to mind. But napalm's history is much more than just Vietnam, and in today's video, we will cover just how it was developed, its destructive application, and how such weapons were eventually limited. Napalm is an incendiary weapon, a mixture of petroleum and gelling agents. The word napalm is a mixture of the chemical names of the early gelling agents, naphthalene and palmitate. It was developed during the Second World War by a Harvard professor named Louis Feiser, a well-liked lecturer who was secretly part of the National Defense Research Committee. Feiser was a gifted organic chemist and turned his skills to developing explosives for the war effort. His research led him to discover the usefulness of, quote, a bomb that would scatter large burning blobs of sticky gel. The result was a 70-pound napalm bomb that was successfully tested in a Harvard playing field. Napalm first saw its use during the Second World War. It was used in the bombing of Berlin, but saw more use in the Pacific Theatre. It was often used as fuel for flamethrowers to burn out enemy pillboxes and defense positions. Often, those killed by napalm flamethrowers in enclosed spaces died not from the burns, but from carbon monoxide poisoning. The burning of napalm would often use oxygen in the air and give off carbon monoxide. Where Japanese soldiers had dug in and refused to surrender, napalm proved an effective if horrendous weapon. Napalm bombs played a major role in the firebombing of Tokyo in 1945 in what was known as Operation Meeting House. Fueled by largely wooden structures, the subsequent firestorms claimed the lives of around 100,000 civilians, making it the deadliest air raid in human history. In the years after World War II, napalm was used in a number of conflicts. From the Greek Civil War to the Korean War, many countries used napalm. It was deployed by the French in Vietnam in the First Indochina War. Here, napalm saw much use. The Rhodesian Air Force used napalm, and so too did the French in the Algerian War. Its use often resulted in civilian casualties, many of whom left with life-changing injuries. One of the defining characteristics of napalm is the sticky burning gel. It burns at around 1000 degrees Celsius and can burn for a prolonged period of time. This makes napalm effective at ensuring buildings will be set ablaze, but when a person is exposed to napalm, the intense heat or blast is often enough to kill. If the napalm gel lands on a person, it will quickly burn through any clothes and sink into the skin. It will cause deep burns as the gel eats into the flesh, and if severe enough, can cause multiple organ failure. For those who survive, they will be left with scarred skin and damaged muscles. Once burning, it is incredibly difficult to put out the fire, save by smothering the burning gel, which can risk in spreading the napalm even further. It will be through multiple skin grafts and surgeries that a survivor of napalm can hope to recover, a long and expensive process not available to all. To be exposed to napalm has been described as a torture by combining the horrors of chemical asphyxiation with intense burns. Exposure to napalm was a horror beyond comprehension. It was during the Vietnam War that napalm saw its greatest use, as well as much media exposure to its deployment. It was used to burn out Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces hiding in bunkers, foxholes, and tunnels. Bombers dropped around 352,000 tons of napalm during the conflict. Along Vietnam's rivers, riverboats mounted with napalm flamethrowers, nicknamed Zippos, were used to destroy tunnels and bunkers along the shore. By this time, the recipe for napalm had changed to using polystyrene mixed with petroleum, making it much cheaper to produce. This only helped in making the use of napalm more widespread, cementing its status as synonymous with the Vietnam War. Many people, including children, fell victim to napalm, with those who survived left with horrific injuries. There is no doubt as to the most famous survivor of napalm, that being Kim Phuc. The Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph of 9-year-old Kim screaming in pain as her back burned became the defining image of the Vietnam War. We do have a specific and separate video on Kim's story for those who are interested, but as a point to show the damage napalm can inflict, we will leave you with one truly disturbing fact. Kim underwent dozens of operations to help manage her injuries. Her last surgery was in 2022, some 50 years after being burned with the napalm. The napalm severely damaged her nerve endings, leaving Kim in agony as they could misfire. That's not to say anything about the psychological impact of being subjected to a worldwide famous photo in a vulnerable and painful situation. Such was the damage inflicted, Kim has required surgeries throughout her life. Despite this, Kim has spent her life helping children who have survived the horrors of war. As the world saw what was happening in Vietnam, the use of napalm became a focal point for the anti-war movement. The company Dow Chemicals, the maker of napalm, was targeted by boycotts and demonstrations. Dow Chemicals also made other products such as Agent Orange, which is a carcinogenic defoliant that causes horrendous birth defects, and Saran Wrap. At university campuses, students would kick out Dow Chemical recruiters, refusing to work for a company that produced such weapons. Louis Pfizer, although not regretting creating the weapon, did have his own concerns about the deployment of napalm. He insisted he envisioned the weapon used only against wooden structures, not against people. Pfizer would later admit his role in developing napalm from his autobiography, distancing himself from his most infamous creation. He would also attempt to distance himself from the application of napalm, stating the inventor of the rifle is not responsible if it is used to assassinate a president. To this day, napalm and other incendiary weapons are not prohibited against military targets. Rather, there is a ban against using napalm against civilian targets and areas with concentrations of civilians. The UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons of 1980 imposed this restriction, which would make tactics as area firebombing as seen in Tokyo prohibited under international law. Whilst many countries abandoned napalm in favour of other incendiary weapons like white phosphorus, it has reportedly been used in recent times. Argentina had stockpiles of napalm and attempted to use napalm against British paratroopers on 2 occasions, though it did not ignite. There were reports of napalm barrel bombs deployed during the Syrian civil war, both against Kurdish fighters and against civilians. Whilst the use of incendiaries has declined due to international law, they can still be used against military targets, with allowances for civilian casualties where all feasible precautions are made to avoid them. Napalm is not only a weapon of great destructive power, but also one that has permeated into popular culture. The famous quote, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning, it smells like victory," from the film Apocalypse Now captures public perception of its use in Vietnam, and the perception that the United States military saw escalating violence to attempt to win. The disturbingly glib military song, "Napalm Sticks to Kids," is an example of how soldiers themselves saw the use of napalm, as well as the wider horror and dehumanization in the Vietnam War. The marching-style song sang in a military cadence was reportedly written using individual soldiers' experiences of the war. Snippets of this song have been used in the beginning and end of the video. Due to the prevalence of Vietnam War movies, napalm in turn became part of cinema as a weapon closely associated to the conflict. The use of napalm has thankfully declined, though its legacy will remain. The impact of firebombing during the Second World War and its wide use during the Vietnam War will cement napalm as one of the more destructive weapons of the 20th century.
18 kids in a no-fire zone, books under arms and going home. Last in line goes home alone. Napalm sticks to kids.